right. While attendees are scrambling in, I might as well start. It's 10:01. Good morning and welcome to this webinar, Building Blocks for Flexible Education. I am Sam Stuyver. I'm a project support at the Making Education More Flexible zone of the Acceleration Plan, and organized by the zone in collaboration with the special interest group Educational Logistics, together with Frank Vriends and Marina Brinkman. We will provide an extensive explanation of the publication Building Blocks for Flexible Education with Personalized Learning Paths. We already gave this webinar in Dutch on the 8th of November, and we're planning to organize the English one, this one, on the 9th, but we had to cancel due to sickness. And I'm happy you're finding us all on this new time for the English version of the webinar. Let's see the program for today. During the webinar, we will discuss two of the building blocks mentioned in this article and the lessons learned during the process of the publication. So Frank will start with a general introduction of flexible education, after which there's some room for questions. And then Marina will tell something about learning activities in personalized learning paths. There will also be room for questions after that. And after that, both will tell something about the publication in practice at their own institution. That's the program for today. First, a little bit about the process and the publication. Around June last year, we met with the Quality Issues Working Group that focuses on flexibilization and the quality of higher education to identify the themes the working group should be working on. And yeah, everyone brought their own themes, and there were different ideas as to what to tackle within the working group. And in this conversation, we came to the insight that for all themes, the common denominator was that in quality assurance area for all steps of education, we actually go through all kinds of different levels of the PDCA cycle. But yeah, what we were supposed to do with this information, we weren't really sure. Another comment was that often quality assurance only takes place afterwards. So after a module or a part of education has been designed. Together with these two observations, we came to the conclusion with the working group that it would be very valuable if we could design a kind of blueprint, Q&A kind of thing for modular education. Quality assurance from quality frameworks prior to designing the module is what we were looking for. And so with the remnants of the pandemic and lockdowns, we decided that it would be very valuable to organize a physical work session with each other. In the preparations for this, we also came to the conclusion that only a perspective from quality assurance was not sufficient. There were so many educational matters attached to our idea that we also asked members of the Educational Issues Working Group of the zone to participate in this project. This session took place just after the summer. It was a very good first step and also a very valuable meeting that already produced a first physical output, a poster, as you can see on the slide, which really helped us organize our thoughts. And in the process, we luckily had someone like Marina on board who quickly poured our thoughts and output into a visual representation to give us an idea of what we were making, what it could look like. And the form and expression, as you might know if you've seen the publication, have changed somewhat over the process of adding content. We weren't sure if we wanted more of an infographic or not, but the basics have remained the same, divided into learning outcomes, assessments, and learning activities. What questions do you need to answer for yourself when you start developing flexible units of education? And during the process, we noticed that the combined group of educational and quality assurance experts was just a little bit too large to succeed. So we also, together with the fact that we also always worked online, it caused the process to slow down a bit. So we met with a small group physically to make the first draft. And this way of working turned out to be very fruitful. So we continued it till the end of the process, classes with a small group and then feedback rounds with a large group. And in August of this year, we completed the publication with satisfaction and published it. that was a little bit of the publication and process leading up to today. Then on to a little bit more substantive content. I would like to ask Frank Vriends to introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about flexible education. Yeah, Frank Vriends, please.
Good morning. My name is Frank Vriends. I'm an educational advisor at the Learning and Innovation Center of the Avans University of Applied Sciences. I'm a member of both the program team of Avans responsible for the educational transition toward flexible education and the zone flexibility, part of the acceleration plan. On top of that, I'm a member of the National Steering Committee of the pilot micro-credentialing on behalf of the zone flexibility of the acceleration plan. In this webinar, I follow, broadly speaking, the aforementioned publication. In that sense, I start with a brief explanation about flexible education. Next sheet, Sam. In that sense, I start with a brief explanation about flexible education, at least the definition of how we see it. Then I will say something about where to start with designing flexible education, how to best approach the design, and which criteria to fulfill. In other words, which elements to take into account. What is flexible education? If one speaks about flexible education, it is key to get clarity about the definition. Flexible education is executed in many different ways. Think about different locations where the education is executed, difference in pace, differences in delivery, etc. It's all about variety and the possibilities of choice for a student. The central theme with flexible education is the student perspective. The first deliverable of the zone flexibility perfectly displays this student perspective. This classification mainly focuses on the different pathways a student can take during the learning journey. The first three are targeted towards obtaining a degree, and the fourth is targeted towards lifelong developing. This classification causes challenges due to the fact they differ from the common one-size-fits-all approach. Therefore, they challenge our systems and processes if we want to apply these mechanisms within our organization, let alone across multiple higher education organizations. This publication is mainly targeted towards designing educational units. Example given, educational units as a unity of learning outcomes that could be taken separately for from a specific program. In that sense, the publication is meant to be used for the student pathway of the beaten track. On top of that, it could be used for modular learning as lifelong developing. And perhaps it could even be used at my diploma, although this student pathway doesn't exist yet in higher applied education. Next slide. A classification that we currently use a lot is the classification of Jonker, Martens and Vogt, which puts learning at center. This was also touched upon in our recent publication regarding student needs. They distinguish 4 dimensions: what, where, when, and how. And if you design separate educational units, which possibly could be part of a personal learning journey, you will always have to deal with the 4 dimensions mentioned before. Depending on the choices made and depending on the choices made regarding the level of flexibility applied on a specific dimension by the institution, the department, the domain, the vision, program, or whom it may concern within your institution. Where do I start? Where do I begin? Where do I start when I would like to design flexible educational units? take note of why one would like to design flexible education. Deeply understanding and breathing the vision and ambition where one wants to go is usually defining the choices you need to make in designing the education and the direction of the desired result. The same holds true for having or not having a framework. The bigger the scope of the chosen flexibility, the tighter the framework possibly needs to be. Is it just flexibility within your own practice, in your own profession, your domain, institution, or across institutions, nationally or even internationally? And how do I do this? Which design steps are we going to take? In this publication, we have constantly chosen two familiar and generally accepted educational design strategies, backward design and constructive alignment. In contrast with example given Hill or design-based learning or learning lines models, etc., the aforementioned strategies focus on top-line directions for the design and are not touching upon didactical choices, learning activities, or how exams should be like. They do focus on the order of the steps and the way in which the elements ought to be connected. This is also the way we have designed it. We've designed our publication. Firstly, by focusing on the desired output of the educational unit in terms of learning outcomes, and secondly, the way in which one should show that one masters the output. In the last phase, one should think about learning activities and instruction. Concerning requirements of a flexible educational unit, we mean the educational and quality requirements. The better you communicate those upfront, the bigger the chance of achieving the desired outcome. Okay, and which requirements are needed? First of all, the information the student needs to make a sensible choice. Example given, information about what one can learn with this unit, about study load, about level, the way the unit will be examined, when it will take place, entry requirements, etc. On top of this, you will need to take care that the quality of the educational unit is guaranteed. Think about how the plan, do, check, act cycle is structured. Which procedures are in place? Which responsibilities are connected where and with whom? In short, make sure the flexible educational unit is embedded in a quality assurance system. For now, I would like to leave it as this, and Marina, will you take place of for the second part?
Thank you, Frank, for this
Yeah.
For your presentation. We lost Marina for a little bit, and that's why we're admitting her back in. So that's why I'm taking over for a second. Yeah. Also, I would like to invite the attendees to, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat. There, as of right now, aren't any questions. We had a really nice slide with questions, but I don't see any in the Q&A, but please feel free if you have a question on the meanwhile for Frank. There's more time later also. And I see we've got Marina back into our meeting, which is very nice, because we have a little bit of a presentation by you, Marina. But first, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Good morning. Technical hiccups. It happens to the best of us. I just left by coincidence. I'm so sorry about that. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Marina Brinkman. I work in Breda at Breda University of Applied Sciences, currently as part of a team responsible for facilitating and facilitating and nurturing educational innovation. Since this academic year, full-time busy with educational innovation strategies within the university, and just as Frank, being part of the zone flexible education within the acceleration plan. But before that, I worked as a lecturer for about 15 years, no, actually 17 years to be precise. Born and raised international, but living in the country for quite a long time. That's kind of in a nutshell what I'm currently doing and my background. And then, as you already understood, I'm one of the active members in that group working on this publication, this article related to designing flexible education. And when we were thinking about which building blocks, because there are 4 that we basically worked out in that paper, I chose to dive deeper into learning activities in the personalized learning paths. And after the introduction of Frank, what is actually flexible education, then I'm going to now, well, really stand still at some elements related to designing learning activities, some requirements for successful learning activities, and some tension points that you can take along in your design process. And obviously in the publication, the other 2 building blocks are also quite extensively explained. And considering the time that we have, we cannot touch upon everything, but some of the highlights, and invite you to dive deeper into that, into the publication for sure. And as Sam said, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. We have some time to discuss them. Can I have the next slide, Sam? Yeah. So when we talk about learning activities, I think it's important to first also realize what are learning activities. So learning activities are all kind of activities which actually initiate the learning process for a learner. So they are, as already explained briefly as well, they're linked to units of learning outcomes, or one learning outcome, and they actually facilitate the learner in their development. So that's quite a broad understanding of what learning activities are. And they take many various forms. But the idea, of course, is that the learning activities you as a designer are going to develop or work with right now as well are probably a very well carefully selected, designed by you, or maybe selected by existing ones. And we're really talking about materials which shape up the whole education. And it's important before you start developing learning outcomes that learning activities, I mean, that the learning outcomes are well defined and that the assessment is also worked out. As mentioned, the idea of backwards design is what we followed here as well. So that's kind of a very important first step in this building block as well. So that is initially something which needs to be set. Only then you can design learning activities and which are offered either as a fixed learning path or as a suggested learning path. And the idea or the logic that we have followed in the publication is the idea of personalized learning path. That doesn't mean that there is no, let's say, suggested learning path for our learners. Now, currently, when we work with our students, at least in regular, let's say, bachelor and master programs, very often we do consider our students and we work with cohorts of students in relatively fixed learning path that they follow. Of course, there is some freedom to follow a minor or an exchange program that is definitely existing. We are not claiming here that there's no freedom of choice per se, but what we're actually claiming here is that the freedom of choice can be much bigger on very specific elements, and I will dive in 1 or 2 now as well. And at the end of the day, those learning activities need to assist the learner in acquiring the learning outcomes. And in all kinds of activities that we talk about a harmonious blend of activities with variation in place, for instance, face-to-face, online, or at the workplace, time, synchronous or asynchronous, and composition, meaning individual or a group composition of a learning activity. And making choices as a designer about the degree of what we call learning path independence sets the framework for this personalized path. It actually determines how personal it can become and which choices the learner can make about, for example, the place and the time for learning or with whom to learn really depend on the choices the institution has made on which dimensions to allow for more flexibility. And in my experience so far, these choices are very much colored by the context. And by that, I mean by the institutional strategy itself, by the geographical situation, really position even of an institution, and by the domains or the sector, the content, the type of programs which are offered. To give you an example, within the technical domain, for instance, collaboration with local companies can be the driver to develop learning activities that are very strongly embedded in local issue related to energy transition or sustainability development within a specific area. And very often those learning activities can take place within the workplace. If you think about general management programs, from my experience, for instance, in the hospitality and tourism, other consideration can be made when developing the blend of learning activities, such as the international character of our programs. In any case, institutional strategy and vision determine those choice and determine the degree of learning path independence possibility for the learners. Hence, the boundaries of the framework of which you as a designer have when you design learning activities. And specifically, next slide, Sam. When we design further, we basically argue that you would need insights in a couple of elements, and at least in the learning environments and the wishes and the needs of the intended learner. And I would like to stand still and discuss briefly what are the different elements when we think about the learning environment. Because it's sometimes when discussions or conversations I talk about learning environment, people very often picture the digital learning environment or only the campus, the physical learning environment. But actually the learning environment is much broader in itself, and there are many more elements which are important and interesting, not only when you design learning activities in flexible education, but in any kind of learning activities, of course. If we stand still at the definition of Kallenberg and his colleagues, learning environment entails the measures and the conditions taken to elicit or maintain the required learning processes and the motivation of the students in order for them to achieve the desired learning outcomes. And there are some sub-elements of it that I would like to touch upon. The first is a group of elements: the learning content, teaching methods, and the sequence of learning tasks. I think these are rather important, as I said, for any kind of learning activities in any kind of flexible, less flexible curriculum. So if we talk about the learning content, basically the learning content must be aimed at acquiring specific knowledge elements or skills, just as applying what has been learned, what we also know as a transfer. And the teaching methods that one would choose in any kind of teaching situation, they are meant to specify and they're meant to ensure that the learner basically reaches a stage of self-regulated learning. A very important idea when we think of creating more flexibility in learning paths, for many more reasons. I'll touch upon coaching in a minute as well. And in this case, you can think of strategies or techniques as reflection, explication, modeling, and scaffolding. Very helpful when you think of which teaching method will indeed help for the learner to reach a certain level of self-regulated learning. The sequence of learning tasks is another one within the units of study. So basically defining the order according to their complexity and diversity, and again in line with the broader educational vision of the institution. Currently we're at a very interesting conversation about a sequence of learning tasks, and I think when one starts designing activities in a learning path, in a more personalized learning path, this is a new type of conversation that we have with each other, and it really challenges us as lecturers and designers to think if indeed the way that we have now offered our educational programs and the sequence of tasks, sequence of projects, sequence of models offered is the only way, or are there more more possibilities for the students, and in that sense allow them to create these personalized paths as well. The social context is also, I think I miss here something on the slide, but one of the elements that I wanted to touch upon when we talk about learning environment is the social context of the learning environment, as that one is in particular relevant and interesting for flexible education. And when we discuss social context, we can approach it from two perspectives. First, think about the social context which is representative for the various contexts where the learner ultimately has to apply the acquired knowledge, skills, and attitude. We very often try to simulate types of social contexts which are in line with the profession down the line that the learner will basically have to execute. But another approach as well is the one from the socialization perspective. The idea that a learner needs to belong to a group because that ensures commitment, motivation. And in the context of flexible education, this perspective is a challenging one. It brings additional complexity with itself, as we can imagine or foresee that the groups of learners and the composition of the groups of learners will change much more with different pace when we basically have the possibility for more freedom of choice. And at one side, people argue that such kind of higher diversity with a group of learners can basically bring a richer experience for everyone, various peers. But at the other hand, it also has challenges in the sense of maybe creating this lack of fellow students, the one you can turn to, of lack of commitment. So in any case, socialization really is a point of attention for the design of flexible education, especially when you think of the processes the learners go through. And we are really challenged to design different formats of group formation, I would say. Two more elements related to learning environments. It's the appropriate organization of education. And in that sense, we need to think of contact moments, the location of those contact moments, as now we gained a lot of experience in the advantages of having contact moments online. I'm not claiming that they are obviously the same with its impact as they're offline on campus, but I think they also have their merits, and we will have to learn a lot in the future to make the best of online contact moments. Access to learning materials is also part of appropriate organization of education and other facilities which support learning in general. And the last element, and it's really on purpose mentioned as last, is the whole idea of digitizing learning environment, digitization of the learning environment, as that one is very often described as the dimension which actually connects all learning processes. And there is really much attention drawn currently to the implementation of technology in education to actually achieve the desired effect on learning as intended in the educational design, as it goes without saying that creating blended learning is part of this transition that we are all engaged with. And there's a lot more out there for us to explore. For instance, think of virtual reality, creating simulation, currently really being developed a lot, for instance, in programs related to healthcare, but also in teacher qualification programs. And I imagine that there will be a lot more that we'll discover in the future. Next one, next slide, Sam. Another element which is also worth taking the time to discuss is the learner's wishes and needs. I mean, as a designer, we all constantly consider what are our learners' wishes and needs. And there's a list of some of those wishes and needs that you can take along when you start designing a flexible learning path. Like, for instance, the background characteristics of your learners, their contextual characteristics, their expectations, prior knowledge, attitude to learning, preferences related to learning, in relation to learning, and technical skills and access to systems. And for the sake of time, unfortunately, we cannot go through all of them, but I picked only some, like, for instance, expectations, prior knowledge, and attitude to learning for reasons. And I'm going to picture my experience as a lecturer, as when I would work with a cohort of students over an academic year time, it takes at the beginning some effort to understand them and knowledge about the paths and the steps that they have taken before, to know what is their prior knowledge, and to know what is their attitude to learning, and to know what they expect of courses. But I think we need to wonder how much we know about those elements and about the learners' wishes and needs when we have a even more diverse group of learners and a changing composition of the groups. If suddenly we have students in our classroom for other programs within our own institution, which are from a totally different domain, or from learners from other institutions, does it mean automatically that they have similar attitude to learning, or similar prior knowledge, or similar expectations? I think many of us actually doubt that. And the claim here is that we will need to take more time to dive into these aspects when we design our education, and also when we start delivering the education. So, for instance, when we talk about expectations, there are questions that you can ask yourself. Why does the learner want to follow this specific unit that is offered? Is it a choice, or is it somehow mandatory? What do they think that they will gain out of it? What do they think that, how do they think that it will help them in relation to the learning outcomes and the goals that they have set for themselves? So what is the expectations that they have in terms of effect on their work, or on their activities within a work area, for instance? So, and a very follow-up question here as well is, how do we get insights into these expectations? For instance, if we have learners from other institutions, so what are the ways that we can, in advance or while we are designing the units, we can know more about that? Same goes for prior knowledge. So what prior knowledge does a learner have or should have is also a question that you can ask yourself as a designer. What is the knowledge and the skills that they master, and how can we fit our educational activities to their level of knowledge and skills mastering already? Differentiation here will be definitely a skill that I claim to say, as lecturers in higher education, would need to become better in that sense. And last, what is the attitude to learning activities? So what is the questions that they have? What are the questions related to the content that they would like to have answered? And how can we leave some space within our designs in order to tackle these questions? And I would like to move now to the next part of what I've prepared, thinking about set of requirements for the successful application, I would say, and implementation of learning activities in flexible learning paths. And I've picked two. First one, and I think three at least, but the first one that I would like to discuss is the one related to coaching and support. The thing is that what we already know is that not every learner can foresee or deal with the consequences of the choices made. That the beginners or the novice learner can only partially or not at all even foresee the consequences of their decisions, and therefore they really cannot deal with them. And that in that sense, that we are also facing, as part of designing learning activities, with the challenge of designing learning activities which will help the students or the learners to make those choices, help them in, for instance, really understanding which choices that they're making, which learning activities that they are placing in the learning path will contribute to developing the learning outcomes that they have set for themselves, or are set by a program in that matter, if the diploma is still the end goal of the whole learning path. And in that sense, what we think is that the role of a classic student counselor, as many of us know it in institutions of higher education, would shift in the next couple of years, and that those classic student counselors will also become more content experts than mainly focusing on the process at the moment, as it is, I would say, the practice at a lot of our institutions. And they will play a major role in assisting learners when giving them advice about the relationship between the chosen activities and acquiring the learning outcomes, the sequence of the learning activities to be followed, and the connection of the choices made with the individual wishes and needs. And another element related to coaching and support is a study plan. So the idea that a study plan can help the learner for many, many different reasons. And some of us find it a sensical thing to do. Some of us find it nonsense. So this is an interesting element to talk about and discuss with your teams. But in any case, a study plan means that it will help a learner to shape their learning process, to record the choices made in relation to the intended learning outcomes, how one wishes even to be supervised in that matter, what is the role of the current or the future employer as part of of the learning process. And I think, for instance, and I mentioned already the healthcare and teacher qualification programs, as we see the sense of urgency in our society for more teachers in elementary schools and more professionals in the healthcare, you see many different formats of learning activities existing, especially in terms of also the place, but also the coaching that the learners get. In that sense, having a study plan will be very, very important for those learners. And it is very important for those learners because choices are recorded and one can also deviate from it goal-oriented when you have a plan like that. Related to coaching and support as well is the idea of informing extensively what is possible. I think that's, that is the last bullet here on the slide. So the idea is that in order to be able to choose activities, learning activities, one needs to have access to that information, and that information needs to be presented clearly and completely as a broad orientation, but also as in relation to the intended learning outcomes. And we also challenged, I believe, as designers to create different formats for the future learners to experience what the educational offers might entail. What I've seen in my own institution, but also with others, is that with the help of our marketing communication colleagues, for instance, we became very good in formats for future students, for them to allow them to experience what the program before they actually sign within a university might be for them. But I wonder how much of that experience we actually use within our institutions when our students and learners are actually already on board and they are part of our institutions. Considering the possibilities that we want to offer them in the future, the idea here is that we allow them as well, before they actually sign off for a learning activity, to experience what that might be in order for them to commit to a longer period of time within that program and have more certainty that that really help them to achieve the learning outcomes as they have them in their plan. Well, last but not least, this is really the next slide now, Sam. Last but not least is when we talk about requirements of successful learning activities in a flexible learning path, is the idea of IT didactical support. And this one is extremely important because designing and facilitating an optimal blend of learning activities actually required a digitally skilled teacher. Digitally skilled teacher design teams, I can say, for that matter as well. So digital literacy is seen as the basic condition for using IT in education. And that is also the basic condition for actually creating this optimal blend of learning activities. Remember, I touched upon it briefly at the beginning, where the learner will have this possibility for, and Frank also touched upon the 4 dimensions in the sense of where to learn, how, with whom, and in which way. So and this one is rather complex, or this idea is rather complex, because to what extent each and every teacher should be skilled really depends on the choices that an institution has made for tools, for instance, which support learning, and equipment which supports designing education and actual learning, but also the idea of team-based designing or team-based delivering of education. And the idea here is that each and every lecturer, each and every teacher needs to be equally skilled in using IT in education, or is it also possible that some division is created within the teams with the support of the ICT educational professional? There is an enormous trend in this new role within our institution of an educational IT professional. So colleagues who are basically on the verge of two fields, so educational sciences and the use of ICT or IT in education. And in that sense, we foresee a very important role for them also in the design process of educational activities, and further, of course, in the actual support of executing those. Yeah, so to wrap it up, this last point basically brings me also to the end of this building block that I wanted to discuss. And I think I had one slide with a quote. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I chose to wrap up this part with this quote because I think that we are currently at a stage of transitioning higher education in the Netherlands, and I think also transitioning education in general in the Netherlands, because there are a lot of similar developments related to more flexibility within vocational education as well. And I think for us as designers, but also as professionals, this will be an enormous challenge to, well, unlearn and relearn and really face the challenges that we have in the next couple of years. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marina, for this insightful and in-depth presentation. Nice. I'm thinking that both our presentations are very sound and clear, both of you, Frank and Marina, because at the moment there's not really anyone who has a question for you. It seems that you have very clear presentations. I think for now, as there are no questions, we had some time for questions, but we're just going to continue on with our story. Hopefully at the end there will be someone, or if not, then we can just assume that everything is completely clear. Further on, I would like to invite you a little bit to tell a little bit about the practical application of the publication. I think we've gone into depth of the more substantive part, and now also a bit more of the practical side. I think we'll start off with Marina at BUAS.
Yeah, sure. Well, we were triggered to think about how do you use a publication like this? What do you do with the knowledge that we have compiled in there? And I would like to share briefly indeed how we are at this point using the publication and the knowledge in it. And first, I would like to start with a point that I think Frank and myself repeated a couple of times, is the choice that we have made on the institutional level on which student path, and so in that sense, how we want to shape flexible education within our institution. And that is a deliberate choice for off the beaten track, but within BUAS. So the decision that we have made now for the next 4 to 5 years is that we are going to explore and we're going to design learning activities which will allow the students, the current students, the regular bachelors within BUAS to follow learning units in other domains than the ones that they opted for initially. Those of you who don't know our university, we have 5 domains, starting from built environment logistics to hospitality, tourism, leisure sciences, facility management, games and media design. So very diverse one. So that is basically the first choice that we have made. And this publication will really help us in thinking of those important elements when we design these learning activities, especially the context transcending learning activities, as we will be facing all the questions that Frank mentioned and I mentioned as well in terms of let's say previous knowledge. Previous knowledge will be a very exciting one when we put learners now in one same classroom from built environment and tourism. Suddenly we as designers will need to ask ourselves what is the knowledge that learners have or should have in order to successfully complete that learning unit as an idea. What we are also opting for is designing together education in an interdisciplinary teacher design teams. And what we already have seen a lot in this process in the past 2 years is that developing a joint language in what are we talking about when it comes to designing more flexible education, when we're designing learning activities, assessments, within a more personalized learning part, that we need to work on creating a joint language. And basically the idea is that this publication will help us to define what is and create this joint language within our institution. That we like kind of a placemat or well, a piece of advice, a spot to go to and dive into even more deeper in the suggested links. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we stand currently in our strategy process, and specifically in applying the publication within our institution.
developing a joint language within your institution first before you can develop a joint language between institutions, probably, which this publication helps. Maybe at the same time you can align those, of course, that is possible. Frank, I would like to introduce to ask you to also tell us a little bit about the practical applications at Avans. You are still muted at the moment, so you have to unmute yourself first.
Sorry about it. At Avans University of Applied Science, we made choices for our new ambition period, 2025. We made them back in 2019, and this includes choices regarding flexible education. In terms of student pathways, we also clearly choose outside the beaten track. By the promise that in 2025, all our students are able to choose 25% of their learning journey by themselves. So flexible and resilient, that are the two goals of our ambition period. But we also choose for studying modular in relation to lifelong development, especially for our part-time education program. In fact, by designing all our education in a modular way, in the future, all the student pathways are endless. And in terms of the 4 dimensions from Jonker and others, our ambition regarding flexibility is focusing on the what. And how are we doing it? Next slide. By a sense of all seeing this change as a transition that requires more standardization in our education, and that requires a centralized approach. Because of this, we have put together an advanced educational model in 2021, including principles, including design principles and organizational agreements for all programs. You need to standardize to make flexible programs possible. In 2021-22, we have been experimenting with these, and from September 2022, every advanced program is putting together their curriculum, redesigning the education in order to fulfill the demands of the advanced educational model. So all our programs must they make possible to have 25% of freedom of choice. That's an important part of our ambition, is the 25% freedom of choice of interesting educational units. And the publication helps our teacher designing this part of flexible education. But because we have chosen for the modular structure, the publication is also really useful for designing modules belonging to the heart of a specific program. So that's how we can use this publication. Also for providing a joint language, what is necessary to do this.
Thank you, Frank, for the insight also into practical application of Avans, and quite an ambition. And let's see this slide. 25% is quite the number. There's also a question about that, but first I would like to ask the attendees. We will have a question for the attendees. I think it helps us a lot to know what you think after this presentation on the practical application at your own institution. For that, I've made a little link with a QR code, and that brings you to a Mentimeter, which asked you the exact same question that I just have asked you, and I would love for you to go there and see if you have an answer. It would be very nice for us to give a little bit of insight. Then there was a question from Frank, and it's an anonymous question, so no name. Frank says, students can choose 25% of learning path. The question is first, why 25%? And also, is there an ambition to allow a larger percent to be chosen flexibly in the future?
Yeah. First of all, I have to excuse myself for my my English. It's not so good as the English of Marina. So I'll try to give an answer, but maybe that I'll if it don't work, I do it in Dutch. So then maybe Marina can help me. Why 25%? Yeah, good question. It is the double of what was in all our universities of applied science. We know the possibilities of choosing a minor. That's 30 credits from a program of 240 credits. And now we've decided to double that amount to 60 credits. And why 25%? Why 60 credits? It's maybe it's we have in universities of applied science we have to how do you call it? We moeten voldoen aan de nationale aan de eisen die gesteld worden door het landelijk profiel. En 25%, 60 EC is eigenlijk de maximale ruimte die we op kunnen zoeken voor flexibiliteit. Doen we dat meer, dan voldoen we niet aan landelijke profielen. Dus het is eigenlijk het opzoeken van de maximale ruimte.
Even wachten, Frank. Okay,
Yeah.
so to translate briefly what the last comment of the answer of Frank is that 25%, so the 60 ECs on the basis of a regular program for 240 ECs is the maximum possible space of for freedom of choice within the professional educational profiles, which at least in the case of advanced where Frank works. So that's what's his explanation, that it's the maximum possible at this point in time. Hence the 25% representing 60 ECs.
Yeah, and maybe if flexible education is now a topic of all higher education. Everybody wants to make students have needs of more flexibility. Higher education is ready for providing more flexibility. So yes, I think in the future there are more possibilities. For example, in lifelong learning, we are now we are having a pilot of the micro-credential, and in the future, maybe I tried in Dutch, sorry. Ik denk dat het in de toekomst het belang van een diploma-gericht traject, zeker in het als opleidingen en beroepen snel veranderen, dat wat minder sterk wordt en dus daar in het nodig is om meer flexibiliteit, meer flexibele programma's te hebben. En dan kunnen natuurlijk ook als we dan microcredentialing hebben, die hebben dan net zoveel waarde als bijvoorbeeld een diploma. Dus daar zal richting de toekomst zullen we die kant op gaan, denk ik.
What Frank actually is saying is that, and he made reference to the national pilot micro-credentials, which helps currently, I think there are about 32 institutions participating in that pilot, universities of applied sciences and research universities. As an example, looking into the future with the idea, that's exactly what Frank said, is that the diploma as we know it is expected at least in the professional educational domain, is expected to change in the way that is perceived in the future. Hence, the possibility for even more degree of freedom and for more flexibility will only grow. Also in light with the learner's needs and wants. He briefly, by the way, and that's now me, not necessarily Frank, but he briefly touched upon his slides to another publication of the zone Making Education More Flexible, which is a very nice paper about what we currently know about the students' needs and wants related to more flexibility in their education, and specifically within the programs, as they're coined now, regular bachelor programs, as very often we know that learners and students who opt for part-time studies, they, per definition, want to have more flexibility, especially, for instance, about the length, but also about the time and the place of the learning. And we already know to a certain extent that also the regular bachelor students, as we know them right now, have that need. Hence, the expectation is that this 25%, taking as an example now that Avans has made, is expected to grow to even a bigger percentage because of these two things. So the changing of the value of the diploma in the professional field in itself, and the change in needs and wants of the regular students as we know it. Their demand of more flexibility per se. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Esther from Buas, for your question. You're not anonymous anymore. You identified yourself. That is very nice. Thank you for your question and for a little bit of activity after our presentations. I think that wraps it up with the questions for now. And I would like to thank Frank and Marina for your presentations about both content and practical applications. And also thanks Lily for moderating on the side and organizing everything for us. Thank you for joining. With 2 more minutes on the clock, gives you some rest to get some coffee for your next appointment. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day and see you. Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.